I have a long and also a personal connection to this story. The first article I wrote when I left university for a magazine was about this operation, and believe you me, I will never look at it because I'm convinced it's appallingly inaccurate and definitely wrong. But when I joined the Imperial War Museum, one of my tasks was to actually curate an exhibition about European resistance to Nazi Germany. We looked at it thematically, and one of the themes we looked at was assassination. And as a result of that, this is back in 1984, so many of the veterans were still alive. The man who was my inspiration, if you like, was Group Captain Ron Hockey, who was the pilot that flew Anthropoid. And he was kindness personified and was my tutor and my friend until he passed away in 1991. I also managed to get to know Sir Peter Wilkinson, the head of the Czechoslovak section of the Special Operations Executive, SOE, and learnt at his feet. Ernest Van Morik, who trained the agents in Scotland, was a man I spent a fair bit of time with, along with Sir Douglas Dodds Parker, who was in the operations section of SOE as well. When it didn't finish there, I engineered the Imperial War Museum would do a small exhibition about this. Sadly, Ron had passed away by the time it opened, but we were able to donate some of the displays to the church in Prague, and I'm proud to say that they were there for a fair while. I should also emphasize that what I'm going to talk to you about is just sketching in the narrative of the operation. I venture probably most of you here know a darn sight more than I do, but I will also put a strong emphasis on the British contribution to the operation. I apologize for my mispronunciations of Czech words. I'll do the best I can, but please cut me a bit of slack. And there's a little warning that there are some photographs in this that I felt needed to be there, but some people may find distressing, and I shall endeavour not to linger long over those. And last but not least, the research I've just been doing over the last few weeks in order to prepare myself for this, I'm astonished by the quality of Czech research by Czech historians, certainly from the days when I was trying to look around it. Any thoughts that I might have of writing a book about this is just a non-starter. I have no Czech apart from beer, and my German is pretty lousy too. So forgive me if I'm putting a bit of an emphasis on the British side of things, but there we go. Let's hope. Okay, so he's here. There are many arguments concerning the legitimacy of state-sponsored violence. I think few could argue that this personality as a target is probably as legitimate as you can get. And because of his very evilness, I think this helps to make, as Mikhail said, this a story of epic scale. Good against evil, bravery, balanced by cowardice, friendship, treachery, and even sacrifice. So this is Reinhard Heydrich, born in 1904, a failed German naval officer who was actually thrown out of the German Navy, of right-wing tendencies, even in the early 1930s, that were reinforced by his wife, or his fiancée then wife, who helped sort of propel him into the service of the Nazi Party and the SS. He combined organizational skills and ruthlessness that made him very in fact, he became the protege, if you like, of Heinrich Himmler, and rose very quickly up the hierarchy of the Nazi Party. Now, on the outbreak of war, he was already a powerful man. War made him even more powerful. He became the head of state security. He even, of all things, actually flew with the Luftwaffe in the opening campaigns. But let's also not forget, and I think we will focus on as the acting Reich protector of Bohemia Moravia, but he was also the man who commanded the Einsatzgruppen and their predatory work on the east, and also the man who chaired the Wannsee conference that came up with the final solution. Here we have I think this is a very potent image of him in Bohemia Moravia. He became acting Reich protector in September 41 with a brief to convert the protectorate into a vassal state, to exploit its industry, its agriculture, to make it a viable part of the German war effort. He had a reputation for using the stick more than the carrot. He was adept at this. I think he tended to prefer the stick to the carrot, but very early on tried to subdue and suppress Czech identity, but also anybody who potentially was going to rival his control. Again, because the focus is of Prague and the protectorate, whilst he was the acting protector, he also maintained a very, very high position in the Nazi hierarchy. And I suspect that this may not, or I expect this probably was, a factor why the British were willing to cooperate with and help facilitate his assassination. That is conjecture rather than fact, because the documents are very, very lacking on this. But he was all the time, whilst he was in the protectorate, was also seeking to control German occupation and suppression of the occupied territories. Here we have a photograph, probably well known to most of you, President Beneš, second from the right, Colonel Moravec, the head of his of Czechoslovak intelligence, military intelligence. Now, the situation is of, I mean, and Mikhail sort of sketched in at this, is that the position of the Czechoslovak government in exile in London by 1941 is not in the best of conditions, if it were. There were other exiled governments, there were other exiled armies that had perhaps in some respects for the British a greater potency. There was a perennial concern that Czechoslovakia had to prove itself in order, looking into the future, to secure a return to the pre-Munich frontiers of the country. There was also another facet here, and I mentioned this secret organization, SOE, and their records are open, those of them that have survived, and you can actually see a disharmony between SOE and Beneš's government, and Moravec, who is, of course, primarily the man looking at activity within Bohemia and Moravia. So there is that sort of tension, if you like, and this, I think, in large part conspires towards a determination on the part of Beneš to do something spectacular, to do something that will have an impact, elevate the status of his government and of his people. And they cast around to a certain extent to look at targets for assassination. Emanuel Moravec, Karl Hermann Frank. Oh yes, I won't let you keep on too much longer. The surprise is that today is the anniversary of the execution of Karl Hermann Frank. We thought it was in some ways not inappropriate. But these two were pretty quickly replaced by the opportunity to put Heydrich in the crosshairs. And in October 1941, he was the person identified in London as the target. It has to be said, because if it's October 41, that he's only been in place for about a month or so. So any assumption that this was a culmination of what he was doing to Bohemia Moravia, it was a little bit too early for that. Now, one thing again I want to emphasize, and many British writers have got this wrong, is the fact that Anthropoid is a Czechoslovak operation, not a British one. All too often there is a claim that it was part of the triumphs of SOE or the British Secret Services and so on. It is decided by and tasked by Beneš and his government, albeit restricted number of people who knew about it, and the people that carried it out were Czechoslovak soldiers. The British contribution is one of training, facilitating, equipment, and a big factor, of course, is transportation to get them there. So I think it's just a little note about SOE, and again the British attitude towards assassination. It is not unthought of. At various moments, the options that SOE are considering was to go for a violent option, including attacking a coachload of Luftwaffe specialist pilots in France in 1941. There was even thoughts about attacking the Indian nationalist Chandra Bose as he was traveling through Turkey. There was a famous long-going operation called Rat Week, where SOE coordinated attacks on members of the German security services and collaborators throughout Western Europe, and even Operation Foxley, a very misbegotten attempt to try consideration to kill Hitler, but by that time it was decided that Hitler's conduct of the war was so bad there was no point trying to implement it. Now, one of the big things that SOE could do was to provide the wherewithal to carry out an assassination. And here is a little list of the things, not just that they projected about taking, but that they actually took with them. 2 Colt 38 super automatic pistols and shoulder holsters, 4 spare magazines, 100 rounds of ammunition, 6 percussion bombs with plastic, 4 Mills grenades, 1 Sten submachine gun with 100 rounds, 32 pounds of plastic explosive, 10 pounds of gelignite, a whole range of detonators, fuses and the like, a spigot mortar, which was a weapon that lobbed a high explosive bomb, and a lethal hypodermic syringe. Now, one of the interesting things about being able to talk to some of the SOE personnel who worked on this is to say how they kind of helped to try and put the whole process together. And one of the ways that the methods that they looked at was to throw a bomb, a blast bomb, against a moving car. This was trialled in Hertfordshire by SOE personnel, pretty successfully. Trouble was that the man trialling it was a very good cricketer, and it was said that he was very accurate with his throwing arm, but his colleague Peter Wilkinson said that he kept on missing. The actual car was moving at 25 miles an hour, being towed behind a tractor, but also Peter said that the 2 agents didn't really fancy this very much at all, and it is therefore it was no surprise to him that they should finally have gone for a submachine gun. Now, I think there is, we'll come on to it later, but there is I think both options were the ones that they went with. It wasn't an either or, And one of the things too is that Peter banged on forever about the fact he really was trying to get them these really powerful automatic pistols. And when the story finally unraveled and the cartridge cases were found, he realized that they hadn't taken this pistol on the actual attempt. Now, who were the people? Josef Gabčík, a Slovak born in 1912. He had done regular service with the army between the wars. He had a long experience, but he had experience in the Battle of France in 1940, and he was a volunteer. So a man of great strength of character, if you like, physically quite small. I don't know if you've seen the photographs of him, but he's hardly sort of Clint Eastwood in terms of physique. The second volunteer was Karol Svoboda, who was who was, unlike Gabčík, he was a Czech. And it was clear that Beneš was keen, or even stipulated, that the two agents would be one Slovak and one Czech, to get that sort of balance for it. He had followed the same kind of military career as Gabčík had, but during his parachute training up in Manchester, he suffered severe injuries and had to be replaced by this man, Jan Kubiš, who was also a Czech and had also had the same kind of experience that Gabčík and Svoboda had, and interesting enough, he was also a close personal friend of Gabčík's. I just throw this one in. This is a little bit of a forecast. It's dated the 22nd of January 1942, so that's a month after they go in. But I think it's quite interesting. This is one of the few documents that has survived from the SV archive, because it actually is written by Hesketh Pritchard of the Czechoslovak section for the brigadier who was the operational head, a man called Colin Gubbins. And basically, it shows you that the plan was very loose. You may not be able to see, well, what are the options? Well, it certainly specifies that Heydrich is the target. They have the equipment, but what are the options? Well, A, attacking him when he's getting into the castle, or getting into his office, or placing a bomb in his car or in his armoured railway train, blowing up his railway train, mining a road along which he is going to travel, and shooting him when he is appearing at some ceremony. I mean, quite clearly the intelligence that was available was not that great. And therefore, Kubiš and Gabčík had to, I would say, improvise, but they had to actually handle the practicalities once they arrived. I think this is no bad thing to actually log that pretty early on. Well, the other factor is, of course, is that Czechoslovakia was a long, long way away. And I think time and again, this is forgotten or overlooked. People don't understand the practicalities, and they don't understand how essential the Royal Air Force Special Duty Squadrons were in facilitating this type of operation. Now, the whole question, how are you going to put it together? Well, you found the right kind of men. SOE is completely sworn to secrecy on this. The minister in charge of SOE is told, but it really is need to know to the nth degree. And it is something that there is a huge commitment, not necessarily because there was a risk of German spies in London, but purely it was so serious and so important that they couldn't really, it actually has to be really, really buttoned down. So these are the ranges. You can probably guess that Czechoslovakia is towards the extreme of the range for an RAF aircraft to fly and then sensibly get back. And this is the man that flew them, my old friend Ron Hockey. He was a very, very accomplished pilot. He was only a flight lieutenant at this time. He had, just to hear him talk about the mechanics of flying was an education in itself. He had flown Churchill when he was with number 24 Squadron during the fall of France, and very, very early on joined an elite unit flying clandestine flights for British Secret Services. This was not going to be his first flight. He'd already flown one, to Bohemian Moravia. Now, there were huge problems in terms of logistics, not enough aircraft, but on the 28th of December 1941, the Met reports, the weather reports indicated that there was an opportunity to launch a flight to Czechoslovakia. So many operations, this is December, so the weather is terrible, there are delays, that Ron actually took the decision not to just fly Anthropoid, but to fly 2 other teams in on the same flight. I've looked at his logbook. He had a fairly busy day moving around, moving an aircraft from one airfield to the other. He liaised with Moravec and SOE, and he arranged that he would fly down to a fighter station, RAF Tangmere, near to Chichester, in order to get a little bit of extra range for the aircraft. And it was there that he met, or that he picked up, Anthropoid, which is 2 men, Silver Ray 3 men, Silver B 2 men. And he also took a Czechoslovak military intelligence officer, Jaroslav Schuster, as a conducting agent. So he actually, in the end, had 15 people in his aircraft. And this is it. Okay, they didn't take an awful lot of containers and canisters, but nevertheless it was really, really overfull, and it made the flying very, very troublesome. This is the aircraft. You can see that Ron's school crest that we saw in the other photograph is still there. This was actually took place in Egypt when they had to fly there for a certain operation. They left Tangmere at 2200 over enemy territory. They were buzzed by a night fighter, but no attack was made, but the weather was atrocious. Snow blotted out all recognition marks on the ground, but they ploughed on, and Anthropoid was dropped at 2:24 in the morning. He then subsequently dropped Silver A and Silver B. That wasn't the end of it. Flying back, he flew so low that they lost a trailing aerial in a treetop in the Tatra Mountains. And then when they were flying over the French coast, the cowling of the fuselage lifted, and his second pilot had to end the flight hanging on to this, otherwise it would have fouled some of the controls. It was a flight of 10 hours duration, and when I gave a talk to some RAF special air crew the other day, they were gasping at that feat of aviation with the limited navigational aids that he had. This is a map that Ron never saw, and I think it's quite a good thing he didn't, because this is a German document with which they had actually tracked his aircraft over the protectorate. He was a fairly phlegmatic guy, so I think he probably could have lived with it, but it actually showed that they weren't quite as hidden as he maybe liked. There were subsequent ramifications, because Anthropoid would drop way off the dropping zone. There was no reception committee for them. Interestingly enough, Ron, who was never defensive, but he sort of hinted that maybe that there were two dropping zones. You know, in order for security, they had been given one, whereas he had been given another. But he wasn't really trying to dodge it. It's just to actually find the right country is an achievement, I would argue. Gabčík injured his foot when landing, but they eventually were able to make their way to Prague and to, I would say team up with, but make contact with members of the resistance who would provide an astonishing range of support and safe havens for them over the next months. Because let's not forget that they landed in December and the attack was not launched until the end of May. Now, we saw that other document there, and I think partly it's, well, how are you going to do it? And it took an awful long time to work out the practicalities of it. There's been speculation about the fact that when word got out what the intended target was, there were attempts to, well, it's more than speculation, to actually dissuade them from carrying it out in the light of the likely reprisals. But nevertheless, they certainly soldiered on. During this time, the 5 months that they were there, Heydrich maintained his normal routine. Again, it's important to know he was commuting to Berlin 2 or 3 times a week. So this idea that he was only interested in the protectorate is not true. And it's important to say as well that in January he chaired the Wannsee Conference. So he is a target not just for Czechoslovak purposes, but one for the whole conduct of the war. It's worth just reflecting briefly on the bomb. I mentioned about the way that the improvised idea that they were working on in Hertfordshire. This is one of the bombs that was not thrown on the attempt. So this fell into the hands of the Germans and they took this. It is basically a fuse which was taken from an anti-tank grenade, and the body of it is a plastic explosive that is wrapped up. But it was, again, when you look at this, you can see it is a blast grenade. It's not a fragmentation grenade, and therefore its target is the side of the car. So, to get on to the real nub of it, this is a photograph actually taken from a German investigation after the attack. They had weighed up all of the options and it was decided that the optimum way of attacking him was on his way to work. They had some informants who were able to tell him what his routine was. Heydrich was so arrogant that he refused to have any kind of close personal protection. And he said that this was, by travelling in an open car, this was a statement of his power and authority. And therefore they staked this out and realised that as the car had to navigate this very, very sharp hairpin bend, it would almost come down to walking pace. And that was the ideal location for how they would launch the attack. So on the 27th of May, 1942, they launched it. One of the agents was placed up the hill to flash a mirror to warn them that Heydrich and his car was on the way. And as it reached the corner, Gabčík leapt out in front of the car and levelled the Sen gun, the submachine gun, at the car. It jammed. There was a fault. No one will ever really know what it was. I haven't seen anything of there's any kind of forensic or scientific investigation of the weapon. It has to be said the weapon was cheaply made and had a tendency to jam. Kubiš was there and was able to throw the bomb. Now, it's also said that it was, in many respects, pretty crazy, because if you are being confronted with a man with a submachine gun, you would maybe tell your driver to drive on, get out. Whereas it's said that Heydrich perhaps typically said stop. And there's all the stories of people pulling pistols and one thing and another, but the ability to defend himself was limited with the blast of when the bomb hit against the side of the car. And here you see, again, one of the scene of crime photographs. Heydrich was sitting in the rear seat. Klein, his driver, was naturally enough behind the wheel. What happens next, there is some testimony for this because the Germans interviewed or interrogated some of the people who were around. Having thrown the bomb, it appears that Kubiš and Gabčík fled. Kubiš had another bomb in his briefcase, but he elected not to throw it. Maybe he felt that the job had been done and there was no need. Gabčík dropped his submachine gun and ran away, chased by Klein, the driver. There was a firefight, or at least an exchange of shots, and Klein was hit in the leg, and Gabčík was able to make his escape. Whereas Kubiš, on the other hand, although he had suffered injuries from the explosion, was able to get on his bicycle and cycle away. So we have an injured acting rights protector in or by the car, and his driver is wounded in the leg. But not unnaturally, perhaps, the local passers-by tended to the injured. It's also said that even some people, because they hadn't really a great idea of what was going on, tried to prevent Kubiš and Gabčík from fleeing. I wasn't there, I don't know, but these are some of the accounts that certainly as to what happened. Now, what was the damage done? Well, you can see it's pretty impressive. I say impressive, effective. And I'm emphasizing the British side of the thing. I find it incredible that they actually did it the way that they had been instructed in Hertfordshire. So 8-9 months on, when push came to shove, the actual modus operandi was the one that they had been discussed with them and shown to them in Hertfordshire. And again, another photograph of it, of the sort of damage. Well, the Stern gun was dropped. It doesn't actually have a butt, presumably because it was needed to be concealed under a coat. But it's all happened so quickly. Heydrich was bundled into the back of a van and driven off to a nearby hospital. And again, there are local policemen, and again, it has to be said that this is an event that is sort of shocking, and there isn't any discernible movement or intent by the passers-by to actually try and take any other action. You just sort of, it's like a car accident. You just do the best you can to help. Now, the injuries that Heydrich had suffered were fairly severe. Fragments from the vehicle had entered his back, and his stomach and his inner organs, if you like. He was compos mentis, and within an hour of getting to the hospital, he underwent an operation. His spleen was removed and other procedures undertaken. Obviously, calls were made to Berlin. Himmler sent his own private physician down there. There was some uncertainty about him being in the care of Czech doctors and the like, but they managed to find a number of doctors who were sedate Germans whose allegiances they probably felt were acceptable. And here we have very soon the beginning of the German response, which by and large is investigation and punishment. There's a desire to find out what had happened and obviously to find out who the perpetrators were, but at the same time, and maybe even ahead of that, to extract revenge and to hold the whole nation to account. Your German and certainly your Czech is better than mine, but it's a reward for 10 million crowns for information leading to the arrest of the perpetrators. There were same messages was screened in cinemas, plastered all over newspapers and the like. It was a major campaign. And one of the features of it was this. These are the bicycle, the two briefcases and the coat that were left at the scene of the crime. And these were in fact installed in a shop window in Prague, asking again, and the reward is still there, looking for people who recognize any of this. The whole of Prague was put under martial law. 21,000 German troops and police did a cordon and search throughout the city. In fact, as a little aside, one of the people that they did flush out was an RAF pilot, a man called Roger Bushel, who had escaped from a German prisoner of war camp. And when Roger Bushel was finally sent back to his prisoner of war camp, he was the instigator of the Great Escape at Stalag Luft 3. So these little sidelines there of had it not been for this cordon and search, Bushel would not have been back in Stalag Luft 3. Himmler visited Heydrich on the 31st of May, 4 days after the attack, and was reassured to see his protege starting to, looking like he was on the way to recovery. But Heydrich's condition deteriorated and he died on the 4th of June of blood poisoning from the horsehair upholstery that had actually been blown and pushed into his body. There is any number of articles and debates, and people said that the British had tainted the grenade with some kind of a toxin and so on. Well, given the fact that Kubish had some of it in his face as well, but also you saw that was a blast grenade and not a fragmentation grenade. So it really is a simple matter of the horsehair was the ultimate assassin. There was inevitably a full panoply of Nazi ceremony involved with this. There's lots and lots of newsreels of it all, but here we see Heydrich's body being taken from the hospital. He was then held in state at the palace for a couple of days and then taken to Berlin. And here we have Hitler with Heydrich's two sons, and then Himmler in the middle. Heydrich's wife, Lena, was pregnant, heavily pregnant, and therefore she did not attend the funeral in Berlin. And here we have another part of the ceremony. Now, slightly sort of getting ahead of oneself, I mentioned about the pain, the reprisals. And here we have Lidice, and again, this is this twisted kind of Nazi thinking. The village was razed to the ground. Virtually all of its inhabitants were murdered, along with men, women and children. But there was this sort of idea that it was justified because there was evidence that one of the parachutists had a connection with the village. It is almost bizarre that these people would think that there was some kind of need. They were just venting their horrendous view of life, if you like. And the little village of Rizaki was also followed in the same way. Now, the whole point about getting back to the story of Anthropoid is that they've unleashed this astonishing act, but also they've achieved what they set out to do, but the reprisals are awesome. And it is said that there was even contemplation that they would give themselves up. They were still hidden in Prague, which is itself is a miracle that they should manage to do so, because having been in Prague and having been looked after the resistance for that amount of time, the connections were quite great, and therefore there was a broad range, not a network, but of people who knew about them, knew where they'd been, and so on. But the Germans still couldn't find them until such time as one of the agents sent from England, this man Karol Czerda, who had actually worked with, he knew Kubis and Gabčík whilst he was operating in inverted commas in the protectorate. He got to know them, they shared safe houses together. Now, Czerda had gone into the country and stayed with his family. He made confessions. I've not read those confessions. It's said that he wrote to the Gestapo naming Kubis and Gabčík, but certainly what is known is that he turned up in Prague. He was down in South Bohemia, but he decided that he would go to Prague and confess, he would actually betray his friends and his colleagues. Now, what he could not betray where they were, he could say who they were, but he didn't know where they were staying at that particular time. Again, was it the money? Was it fear? Possibly a bit of everything. But what he was able to do, and this is the way that the pack of cards start to fall, was that he knew that the home of Marie Morokova had been a place where the Anthropoid team had stayed. And he had actually visited it himself. This is her pre-war with her young son and her older son, who actually was a Czechoslovak fighter pilot flying in England at the time. Sadly, he died in a plane crash too. So on the 17th of June, her flat was raided by the Gestapo. Her son was not there at the time, but her husband was. She excused herself to go to the lavatory and took a suicide pill and died before they could take any action. The Gestapo then sent a telegram to her son, who was staying with relatives, saying, "Come back to Prague, your mother is very ill." He duly did so, and he was arrested. And I don't think it's particularly appropriate to talk about what horrors were exacted on this young man, but in the end, he did confess that he knew that Kubis and Gabčík were staying at this church. The Church of Saints Cyril and Methodius on Reslova Street, and it was a haven for quite a surprisingly large group of agents sent from the UK. So not just Kubis and Gabčík. They came in dribs and drabs. Very soon after the attempt on Heydrich's life, and then the last of them arrived on the 1st of June. They were looked after by the clergy, and even who managed to secure a doctor to look after Kubish's wounds that were still there. Now, there's been, again, a lot of speculation. Well, what was going to happen? Well, I don't really think anybody knew. There were no major exfiltration plans there. People have talked about, oh, well, they would be put them in a hearse and then smuggle them out and so on. I think that's probably imposing order on a terrifying, uncertain, scary situation. They're just, you know, I think it's almost like just taking every day at a time. But now the Germans knew where they were. In the early hours of the 18th of June, some 800 Gestapo police and soldiers placed a cordon around the area of the church. And at around 4 o'clock in the morning, a small group of Gestapo officials and troops entered the church by the side door, and the local clergy were arrested, the church staff were arrested, and then they entered the main body of the church. I would imagine that most of you will have seen the various cinematic renditions of this. It's been a story that's lived with me for most of my working life, and even more than that because I went to the church with Ron Hockey, and so it has a real resonance for me. But the more I studied it, the more I thought, how can this be? How can you have these agents firing thousands of bullets, throwing scores of grenades, when we know what they took with them? And we also know that there were no other major supply drops during that period of time. And we also know that the Germans had buttoned down the whole of Prague, so you couldn't move stuff around. You couldn't get an arsenal of weapons into the church. And it just didn't really ring true. And there I am thinking, I'm the man who found the solution to the problem. And then I start looking at some Czech sources and I realize Czech historians are all way ahead of me and they've already got there and they've looked at all the records and so on. And the actual events in the church are just as brave, just as valiant, just as extraordinary. But it doesn't look like the movie with Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood with all the bullets flying around. And I'll get my two pennyworth in now early. It is terribly sad that all of these productions say this is the true story. And you know darn well they're taking complete liberties just to have a big old bang bang you're dead shootout at the end of it. Because actually what I'm going to say is of itself just as brave, if not braver, because the attack and the events in the church are of soldiers armed with handguns. Germans have got the machine guns, the Germans have got the grenades, and that of itself, I think, means that as I relate this, it is not in any way, shape or form to try and diminish their bravery, but actually to suggest that their bravery was all the greater. Three of the agents were sleeping on this balcony. It has been conjectured because this is June, it was warmer to sleep up there rather than in the crypt underneath the church, but also perhaps because they were maybe on watch. As the Germans entered, and it's only a group of a couple of dozen, shots were fired. Shots were returned, and then over the next 2 hours, as more Germans come along, it's a desultory, slow process. The Germans are throwing hand grenades. They are firing with heavy machine guns from buildings across the road, but that image of German soldiers falling over being shot by machine guns is, I mean, and please, I'm looking forward to somebody correct me, but everything I've done and everything I've read suggests that isn't the way it was. However, after 2 hours and the volume of hand grenades being thrown, the three agents on the balcony are overwhelmed. Well, I say overwhelmed. Opalka takes a suicide pill and shoots himself. Kubish is so badly wounded by the hand grenades that he's unconscious and bleeding to death. I think it's this sort of, it makes it all the more personal somehow, because it just suddenly goes quiet. The Germans go up there and take them. So 2 are dead. Kubish they take off to hospital, but he dies on the way to the hospital. And here is another scene from it. Now this is some of the photographs that some of you may found problematic. This is Opalka, who died on the balcony, Bublik, who died on the balcony, and Kubish. Now, at that time, having had this assault, there is no great knowledge of that there's anybody else still in the church. It is said that they spot some extra coats in the church that doesn't correspond to the 3 that are there, but it also would appear that a member of the church staff tells them that the agents are down in the crypt. This is a photograph, again from the German report. There's 4 of them there. There is an attempt to enter through a small entrance from the church, and this is where the defiant statement is flung out at them. So there's no great progress to be made, and again one has to say that it's implicit rather than explicit. The Germans want to capture them. They don't want to kill them. They need to extract their vengeance. They need to find out what's happened forensically. So it moves outside, and the point of it, and on access there is this ventilation grill, which is actually on the church. These are not in necessarily the right sequence. The Prague Fire Brigade have been brought in, and they managed to hook this ladder that the agents were using to actually climb up the side and fire out and even throw Molotov cocktails out. Then a decision is made to smoke them out and also to try and flood them out. Well, this sort of stop-go, it is not going to do the job. It's not going to make it happen. And all those, again, those visions of the waters rising and the agents getting flooded, the furthest it reached was less than 1 meter high, the water. But you'll also be able to, you will have seen that there were opportunities to hide, or not hide, but seek some kind of protection in these areas here, which used to hold coffins of some of the monks and some of the people who are members of the church. So, as it transpires, in fact, the shootout down in the vault or on the crypt, again, is not that great. One German gets shot in the leg as he tries to be lowered down. The main issue comes when finally they did discover that there was a stone slab on the church floor that they were able to break open and then come down the steps. When they got down the steps, there was no firing because all of the agents had taken their lives. And here we have Valchik, Ruby, Svak, and Gabčík. There's no sense of exultation, excuse me, These are sort of photographs sort of after the event. There was like a team photograph made of members of the group of the German attackers, but I didn't really want to sully this talk with photographs of them looking so proud and happy of what they'd done or what they hadn't done. And here we have, now, there was a question of identification. Churchill was brought over and was able to identify some of them, and others were brought to the scene as well. So they were able to identify the fact that they probably had them. Now, I think, just sort of drawing to a close, because I'm conscious of, it's been a fair old while so far, is what do we get out of this? Well, I think what we get out of it, and I do as a historian, is I want to know the truth. I want to know what happened. I want to learn from historians who know more than me. I want to understand what is in records that I don't have access to or I can't read. And however much I keep on looking at the movies, and by goodness, I've looked at them over the years, what I really, really want to actually find out forensically what happened. And I'm really pleased to say, again, to pay tribute to the Czech historians working on this, that I really do think that after all this time, we are getting a lot closer. Just sort of in conclusion and echoing what Mike has said, is that this has a resonance. This had a resonance even during the communist regime, because after all, Attentat comes out in 1964. All right, they tread a little bit carefully about where it was coming from and who was helping who, but it nevertheless is there, and it's part of that spine. I think you maybe use that word as well. For the British, they tended to stand apart. SOE did not trumpet this. SOE did not shout this from the treetops. SOE didn't tell the other British Secret Services for at least a month after all this happened. Need to know really meant something then. And I think that is a tribute. I've also been doing some work. Did Churchill know? And my conclusion is he didn't. It seemed incredible, but I really don't think that he did. I've gone through some of the records, and Lord Selborne, who was the head of SOE at the time when the whole thing unravelled in June 1942, wrote a report, and this is his report. SOE agents, sorry about that, SOE/Czechoslovak agents, have earned the gratitude of mankind by the removal of Heydrich. His executioners, 2 warrant officers of the Czech army, were dropped by parachute near Prague, and the act of justice was well organised and successfully carried out. They eluded capture for more than a month, but were unhappily eventually trapped and in the ensuing fusillade shot dead. The operation was organised at the request of and in the collaboration with the Czech authorities here and in Czechoslovakia. There's no reference to this in any of the Churchill papers that I've seen. It's interesting that almost need to know extended even to the Prime Minister himself. I don't think that is that strange in some respects, because Churchill had to win the war. He delegated so much, but I do think it is interesting that of this huge, momentous event, that the man who everybody said was running the war didn't really seem to do it. There was one more quote here that Selborne, the minister, wrote to Churchill, said, "With regard to recent events in Czechoslovakia, I would like to see you alone if you could spare me a few minutes." And I think you can read quite a lot into that, actually, the fact that that's the way you do it. You don't send a big full-page report, you just see him alone and say, this is what happened. And finally, It's intriguing, and again, this is your next conference. Pride at doing it, a sense of guilt at the consequences of doing it. I think all of these are factors that are worthy of consideration, although sadly so much of the documentation isn't there. So just to finish by saying thank you for your patience. I'm sorry if I banged on for too long. If we've got time, I'll answer questions, or I'll try, and thank you very much.